every single one of us are called by God to be disciples who make disciples. We're all called to be his witness. We all have different giftings. We all have tremendous potential in his kingdom. God is ready to take what we have and use it in his kingdom. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode on the Iron Deep podcast. I'm Josh Howard, and we have an incredible guest today, Pastor Troy from Florida, and I've been talking with him backstage over the last few minutes, and I know you guys are in for an incredible treat. He's got such a passion and a heart, got a book we're going to talk about, and so I cannot wait for you guys to get to know him, to hear his heart. And I know that it's going to be a blessing to you today on this journey to be the best men of God that we can be. And so I'm going to bring him on stage right now. Pastor Troy, welcome, brother. Great to have you, man.
Hey, it's great to be here. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, bro. Well, why don't you just take a few minutes? Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience so they can get to know you a little bit, just a little bit about you and your heart and what you're up to in Florida.
Yeah, well, I was born in Michigan, grew up in Arkansas, and have spent the last 24 years here in South Florida, the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. Been pastoring at Potential Church for probably the last 21 years. I've been married for 35 years. I got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. She's the youngest and a little bit spoiled, but they're all married now. And we got 2 grandkids and 2 more on the way. So it's been an exciting adventure for sure.
You don't look old enough to have grandkids, man. What's the deal? What's your secret?
Get married early.
There you go. Okay, that's the secret, boys. That's awesome, man. Well, it is great to have you on, brother. I'm excited about the conversation we're getting ready to have. But first, tell me about the book that's sitting beside you there. I'd love to highlight that, and we're going to dig into that a little bit today. So tell us about that.
Yeah, potential is my passion. That's my heart's desire. I thought I was going to be a coach. I played basketball in high school, college, overseas a little bit, and that's what I thought I was going to do. God kind of nudged my heart once my wife and I were married, the first or second year actually of our marriage, and we went into ministry. And so, that's that desire to see people become everything God's created them to be. I think the best way to glorify God is to be what he had in mind, when he knit us together in our mother's womb. And so in the book, basically we go from the people of God who were enslaved, and God gave them a promise, right? And they go to the promised land. And to me, that's the same journey we're all on. God's created us with a destiny or a purpose in mind. And there's a lot we can learn from them, things they did right, things they did wrong. And so I just kind of take my story and their story. And hopefully, as we journey together, we learn a few things from one another.
Oh man, that sounds powerful, brother. That's awesome. I would love to hear some of your story, brother. Like, what did that look like for you? Really stepping into the potential that you had in God's kingdom. Where did that begin, and how did you get on the pathway you're on now?
Yeah, it's funny because, like I said, I was planning on being a coach. My degree's in education. My wife's degree's in education. Her father is a superintendent. Her grandfather's a superintendent. I had the setup. I was going to be able to get a job. It was all going to be great. And just as I was about to graduate, and here's kind of what happened. You never can underestimate how important just one step of obedience is. We were at a little Baptist church. It's called Finch Baptist Church. And the pastor was looking for somebody to teach the students, Sunday school is what they called it. And nobody volunteered. So me and my wife said, well, we'll do it. And, we had no idea exactly how to do it. So we went, this is a long time ago. So we went to a Christian bookstore, and they still had those things. And we bought a workbook, and we just started teaching those young people. And as we did, kind of over time, God began to nudge our heart. He began to challenge us. And I'll never forget, we were in this little tiny apartment, and how they have a kind of a bar that separates the kitchen from the living room. And me and Steph, my wife, were standing there, and I'm like, Steph, I just think God's, nudging my heart towards ministry. Now, I didn't know what that meant, because people would say, are you going to be a preacher? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know I sense God doing something in my life. And that really began the journey. I just think that one step of obedience, I had no idea where it would lead. But and ever since then, we've been at 3 churches, a 100-year-old church called Mount Zion. That's kind of where we were when all this happened. And then the pastor left under, I'm sure folks know, but in case you don't, people bring their peopleness to church as well. And so it was kind of an ugly situation when the pastor left. And I remember, I'll never forget, they took me out on a boat, so you hope things are going to go well when they take you out on the boat, but Little John boat. And I was talking to the guy we were fishing. I'm like, have you found a pastor yet? And he's like, well, we were kind of thinking, because I had kind of filled in, and I was young, 22, something like that, 23. And he said, I was kind of thinking that you might do it. And I was kind of overwhelmed. But we were there. And then later we started a church and we were there, and then we came here. So I've only been at those three different churches, but it's been an incredible journey.
That's awesome, man. I love what you said, that one step of obedience really can change everything. It can change the trajectory of our lives. I mean, that's been the same thing that's been true for me, Troy. I look back on my life, and I see different seasons where God was working on me, and if I listened and took that step, even a small step, that can radically change the way things go and the direction that we're going, and small opportunities. I mean, I remember when I was in college, I took this internship. I had no idea what it was going to lead me to do, but I took an internship where it sent me to 8 different countries around the world, and ended up going to India. And that's where I spent the last 16 and a half years of my life. And it was literally a small decision that I felt the Lord leading me to take this internship. And it ended up putting me in a country that God gave me a deep burden for the lost and the broken of that country. Ended up meeting my wife there. And so anyway, all that to say, one little step, man, in God's direction can literally transform everything. And so I love that, just that heart, brother, and that principle. Honestly, for those out there listening, Troy, I think that, depending on what season of life they're in, there are so many times where maybe we know a change is needed. Maybe we know that we're not quite fully at the center of God's will. Maybe we've chased a little bit of, success or money or whatever it might be. And we know that, man, I really would much rather be on God's path. I'd much rather be pursuing Him than anything else. What do you think as people begin to take those first steps of obedience in that direction? What advice would you give them, man, as they begin to really try to hear God's voice and decide what that future looks like for them? What are some of the first steps that you think, if they're really going to step into God's their full potential in God's kingdom, what are a few of those first steps that you would recommend?
Yeah. I think the first one is just take it. We tend to all procrastinate, even if you're not a procrastinator, when it comes to something like this. And remember, God pursues you. That's the reason you're sensing this, is because God hasn't given up on you. I know, the enemy loves to whisper in our ear, oh, you screwed up, or you've gone in the wrong direction, or you're too old, or whatever. But the reality is, the reason you're sensing that is because God's pursuing you. I mean, God pursued Moses. If you think about it, Moses tried to set the people free, and he got ahead of God, and they didn't support him. And so he runs. He's nowhere. He's nobody. And not only that, he didn't grow up knowing and understanding the Hebrews or their customs or their religion or anything. He grew up in the palace. He grew up with the Egyptian gods. And yet God pursued him. And Moses had all the excuses that we do. Like, I can't do this and I don't have that. And it's always interesting what God said. God asked him a simple question. And I think it's the same question he asked all of us. What's in your hand? And God took a stick and he had the most powerful man in the world kneel before that stick, and I think God asked us the same question. So I think that first step is just like, what's in my hand? How do I begin to be obedient today? Because we tend to want to say, well, once I get out of school, or once the kids get older, or once I get married, or once I sell the company, or once I get out of debt, right? We got all these things we're going to do, then we're going to get on track. And it's like, no, Moses is nobody. He's nowhere. He doesn't know anything. And yet God pursued him, and God's pursuing us as well. And so I would just encourage folks, take that first step.
Oh, that's beautiful, Troy. Yeah, what's in your hand is such a powerful question, right? Because I think so often, you're right, we don't ask that question, and we many times think we don't have much to offer the kingdom. And the truth is, I mean, over and over again throughout Scripture, that principle rings true, right? I mean, you're talking about Moses with the staff in his hand, the stick in his hand. God uses that. I mean, when we place whatever is in our hand in God's hands, God begins to multiply that and make impact, right? I mean, you think about Samson with the jawbone of a donkey. God uses that in radical ways. David with a little sling in his hand. We got the little boy in Matthew with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and he places that in Jesus's hands. And so, no matter if it's a stick or a sling or a jawbone or some bread and some fish, whatever skills and talents that we may have, and whatever resources we have, if we just surrender those to the King, he's going to be able to multiply those and use those in way more ways than we could ever imagine. And so thank you for just highlighting that, brother, because I think it's important for us to remember that. And it's important for all of us out there that are listening to this to remember that. I mean, so many of you listening right now, guys, you have so many gifts and abilities and talents. And some of the churches you've been a part of have seen that and spoken into that and helped that. And some of them have not paid much attention to the skills and abilities that you guys have as entrepreneurs and as business guys. But what Troy and I are here to tell you right now is that you have tremendous potential, as Troy says, in the kingdom. And you've got incredible insight. You've got incredible gifting. You've got so many talents. And it's time for us to take whatever's in our hand and lay it before the King of Kings and say, Lord, I want you to multiply this. I want you to use it for your glory. I want you to use it for the multiplication of your kingdom, and just see what the Lord does, right? Put the stick in his hand, put the bread and the fish in his hand, and just see what the Lord does with it. And you will be amazed at what God does. Troy, as you're talking through that book, brother, and as people begin to take that first step and they lay whatever's in their hand right at the feet of Jesus, tell us just what that practically looks like. I mean, I'm sure as you've lived this way for 20 years now, and as a pastor, and as you've been pouring into other guys and gals, I mean, tell us about somebody who didn't think they had much to offer, and they began to take that first step, and really God began to use them in ways that they didn't expect. Do you have a story like that you could share with us?
Yeah, well, if I look at our team here on the staff, it's made up of a lot of folks who would have never seen themselves in ministry, right? But they had certain gifts, maybe administrative gifts, maybe communication gifts, and some folks, whatever you're gifted in, you tend to undervalue, right? Because it comes natural. Like, some folks are just likable. The guy that used to be over Yahoo, I can't remember his name, Tim something, wrote a book called, I think, Likeability. A really cool book. But, some people are just gifted in that sense. Wherever they're at is where the party's at. I mean, we can all learn, but there's some folks gifted in that. And so what I've seen on our team here is that so many of them didn't see the gift, but then as you surrender it and you engage, that's don't worry. I would just say, engage at some level, whatever that gift. If you're a leader, engage, and it may be humbling at first, right? You may be, starting a company and dealing with millions of dollars, and all they give you is the egg baskets or something, but start there. Because like I said, it's those small steps, those beginning steps that so often then open the door of opportunity, either for the person that's listening, or like you were saying, maybe it's the pastor, or maybe it's somebody on staff or one of the leaders who then God, puts a light bulb over their head and they say, wow, we can do so much more. But had you never engaged, had you waited until the right opportunity, the right position, it may have never happened. We've had attorneys, that felt God's nudge and then come into the ministry and see God use their ability to communicate, and their connections, right? Because those are other, again, resources that can be used. And then we've had folks that got out of prison and, and again, tend to think they don't have anything to offer. And yet there's a lot of wisdom that they're able to give to people and to impact people in a different way. I just think we tend to undervalue. We had a guy that came to our church that was a school teacher, and he got into sports industry and all that kind of stuff. And he came up with sports drinks. It took him years, kind of up and down. And then he, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of like the Bang energy drink, but he was the dude that created all of that. So he went from a science teacher to sleeping in the back room to, creating jobs for hundreds of people and billions of dollars and all that kind of stuff. But it was just using the science and the passion that he had that kind of opened the door.
Yeah.
And then he was able to use that influence to reach people.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah. I think you hit on something just a moment ago, brother, that is so true a lot of times. And I know there may be some pastors out there listening as well right now. But you hit on, sometimes I feel like in the church, what we've done unintentionally is that we have guys in our churches that have tremendous business gifting. They're entrepreneurial, they lead well, they know how to, create just opportunity for people. They and so by leading a business and by being entrepreneurial, they have so many different gifts that they're using in the business world. But then sometimes they want to use those gifts in the church, and like you said, maybe the pastor's like, yeah, actually, here's some bulletins. Why don't you just hand them out at the front door, or whatever? And not saying that stuff's bad. We need people greeting people and stuff like that. I'm not saying that, but do you feel like, Troy, sometimes that sometimes the church can underutilize or almost not see the potential in some of the people that we have inside of our church who have these different giftings or business acumen or whatever it might be? Have you seen that being an issue in churches in different parts of the country?
Yeah, I think Erwin McManus just came out with a book and talks about the way we communicate, but he talks about the shadow side. And I think the reason that happens is the shadows that happen in the church. And what I mean by that is often pastors is fear, right? It's not so much that they don't even see the potential. It's that they do see, okay, this person is the leader, and that they've been, punched in the head or stabbed in the back so many times. It's like, am I going to give this person an opportunity, right? And then the leader, it's like, I'm leading a multi-million-dollar company, and like you said, you want me to pass out flyers or something, and so it's difficult. The enemy's good at pushing both of those guys apart, as opposed to coming together in some way, one humbling themselves and the other trusting, so that then those gifts can truly get. And that's when you see things happen, is when they come together and there's a sense of trust and respect, and then they're able to do, great things, because, the church needs all of those gifts. But the enemy, I think, is really good at playing up on our greatest, I guess, shadow sides, that part
Yeah,
of it.
absolutely. Well, and what you're hitting on there, brother, is probably something that almost every man in the world deals with. Is our ego and pride a lot of times gets in the way of what God wants to do, right? And so that illustration you just used, the pastor is possibly fearful, and maybe even he's been hurt so many times. It's also could be some ego there where he wants to make sure he's the leader and he's the one, and so maybe there's some insecurity there as well. But then you've got, some guys that may not want to do some of the normal service stuff because they feel above that or whatever, right? And so humility is going to be key, I think, in all of these areas. That's going to be massive. Let me shift gears just for a second, Troy. I think that what you're hitting on with this idea of potential, that every single one of us are called by God. We all have different giftings. We all have tremendous potential in His kingdom. I think one of the principles you're really hitting on, brother, is really the priesthood of all believers, that every single one of us are called by God to be disciples who make disciples. We're all called to be His witness. We're all called to give all that we can towards His kingdom, whether that's our talents or our energies or what have you. And God is ready to take what we have and use it in His kingdom. What would you say just to anyone out there listening who wants to help other people around them see their potential, other people around them to rise to the occasion and to really step out? Because we've got some guys out there listening that they maybe themselves are living as much as they can into their full potential that God's given them, but they also want to pour into others. They want to make disciples who will grow up into their potential. What is some advice that you might give to help other people see the potential that God has in their lives?
Yeah, I think that, one is you got to be willing to risk, right? That nothing's guaranteed in that other person. and you have to be willing to invest time, and that's really what you're risking, right? You're risking time, you're risking your heart if you're going to, really give yourself to that person. But then also, I would just say you can't be afraid to set some standards, because there are folks who want to grow, and there are folks who want to take that next step, and there's some who are not ready. And so if you're not careful, you can give yourself to folks who aren't willing to do what's necessary. So you got to take a risk, and you got to give your time, you got to engage your heart and your mind, but you also can't be afraid, because sometimes, when it's like business is over here and we can operate one way, and then church is over here and ministry is over here and we operate another way. And it's like, well, good leadership is good leadership, right? And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm going to give you my time, I'm going to give you my energy, I'm going to give you my wisdom, but I need you to read this book. Or I need you to come each week with these questions, or, I need you to, whatever it is that requires something of them, so that you're making good use of your time and energy, because you only have so much, and if you don't make that decision, then you burn out, and then you're helping nobody. You give up, you get cynical, bitter, all those emotions that are just sitting there if we aren't intentional. So I would just encourage folks not to be afraid to ask people, if I'm going to counsel somebody, or a couple or anything, I'm always going to give homework. It's because I'm fine. I'm going to engage, man. I want you to reach your potential, but I can't do it for you. And if you're not willing to do this small thing, then we'll wait till you are.
Yeah.
And then we'll get together,
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So can't be afraid, I think, of doing that, but also know it's a risk. People have their life and their peopleness, and you never know what's going to happen in that sense.
Yeah, that's great, Troy. I've got a buddy of mine who he kind of coined a phrase, and he just writes out the letters "I see in you," just the letters "I see in you." And he says that, a lot of times in order to call out potential in people, you need to have an "I see in you" conversation, which is basically, I see this gift. I know you can do this. I see this inside of you. And to try to call out that potential that they have, in the kingdom. And that's what I hear you saying. I hear you saying, man, there are going to be times where we need to sit down with people and call out what we see inside of them, call out what we see God doing in their lives. And most of the time, so many of us, brother, we've grown up in situations where we've not been intentionally discipled. There's many out there that have actually grown up without fathers now, or without intentional fathers for sure. And very few men have sat down with them and said, this is what I see inside of you. This is what I see in your heart. This is the potential I see that God has given you. And man, we need men to step up and to speak into younger men's lives like that, what you're saying. And there is risk involved. Absolutely. There is, the possibility that somebody may go in the wrong direction or off the deep end or whatever. But at the end of the day, most young men desperately just need somebody to look at them in the eyes and call out what they see inside of them, and challenge them to rise to the occasion that God is that God is calling them into. And so for those of you listening right now, I want you to begin to pray exactly what Troy is talking about. I want you to pray about, who are those men around you? Who are younger men around you that you see potential in, that you see God doing something special in their lives? You see gifting. You see things that could be incredibly used for God's kingdom. Or maybe it's your own sons. But it's time for us to sit down and be intentional and really speak into these men's lives and these men's hearts and say, listen, this is what I see inside of you. This is what I see God doing. It's time to rise to your potential, your full potential, and to do everything that God's called you to be. Troy, towards the end here, as we begin to kind of land the plane over the next few minutes, I would love, just as a man that's lived this so faithfully, brother, you've led, like you said, 3 churches. You have a heart for people to really step into the full potential that God has given them. Would you just look into the camera, brother, and speak to these men's hearts? What would you say to them? What challenge would you give? And would you just take a few minutes, man, and call out the potential that you see in these men's lives, and the challenge that you would give them to really begin to step into this and live it out?
Yeah, I think, again, when you think about the people of God, they were enslaved for 350 years, maybe in Egypt for 400 years. That's a long time. And then they go through the plagues, they go through all of this. Then they're leaving. And the Egyptians give them their gold, their silver, their designer clothes. I mean, this is going to be awesome. Even some of the Egyptians go with them. They're so excited. And then God takes them the roundabout way. I get in my car, I want to go the shortest route. And God takes them the roundabout way to prepare them for what he has for them. And I just want to encourage, whether you're the older person, with the wisdom, whatever that means, the experienced person, or the younger person who's trying to get that experience, that don't allow yourself to get discouraged. If you're trying to call out potential, if you're trying to disciple people, you may have to prove that you truly care. Young people tend, they get to decide what's cool. They get to decide what movies or do well, all that. So it can be intimidating, as an experienced person. I'm not hip. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how. And so that first time you step into that may be uncomfortable and may not even be received. And I just want to encourage you to not give up just because you're rejected by that person the first time. Again, I'm not saying but I'm just saying don't give up. You've got to show that you truly want to see them succeed. And then I would say to the person that is, nobody will mentor me, nobody cares about me, I'd say the same thing. Don't surrender. And let me just tell you how to find a mentor. That is to find somebody that you see that has that wisdom and help them succeed. Be willing to serve them at the beginning. And I promise you, as you do that, you're going to get doors of opportunity to be able to learn from that person. And so I think a lot of times we just give up too quick. We give up too soon, and then nobody wins, right? I whining that nobody wants to be mentored, these millennials or whatever, and then the young person's like, nobody cares enough to mentor me. And the reality is, we're all busy. There's an adversary that doesn't want us to interact. And each one the scripture even tells us in the Old Testament, one has energy, right? And the other has wisdom. And the enemy wants to keep those things as far apart as possible. And so we have to realize that and then be intentional and put in the effort like we do in building companies or graduating school or whatever it is we're doing to actually engage and do life with one another.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Troy. And I hope you guys heard that. Listen, if you are an older one that believes you've got wisdom to share and you want to pour into younger people, you need to be looking for younger people and intentionally pouring into them and speaking into them and invite them along on the journey. But if you're a younger person that is longing to be mentored and you want somebody older that can pour into you, look for an older guy that you look up to that you can serve for a season. Offer your, help to them. Offer to help them in any way possible. Offer to ride along with them to a meeting or whatever. Help them in any way you can, like Troy said, and you're going to have opportunities to learn from them on the journey as you're serving them. It can't just be, oh, what am I going to get from this relationship? It's got to be, what can I give into this relationship? And you're going to be able to find people that can pour into you. I think that's such a wise point, Troy, that I think so many of us young leaders forget about. We kind of just want some random, amazing, incredible leader to come up to us one day and say, come and follow me, or whatever. And the truth is, we need to be, seeking that out, and we need to be serving those men and really helping them in any way we can. And while we do that, like you said, we're going to have opportunities to learn. We're going to have opportunities to build deeper relationships. And I think that's incredible, man. Towards the end here, Troy, tell me if somebody wants to reach out to you, brother, if they want to follow up with some of what you've said, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, all the social media is my name, Troy Gramling, and they gave me a very humble email address, troy@troygramling.com. So they can email me there if they would like.
Troy at Troy.Troy. Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah. That's awesome. So it's Troy at Troy Gramling, and that's Gramling, correct?
That's correct. No B. No B.
Okay, no B. Okay, awesome. So Troy at troygramling.com. Awesome.
Yes.
And what about your book, brother? How can they find your book?
You can get it at Amazon, you can get it at Barnes & Noble, and it's an easy read. But hopefully it would inspire and motivate somebody to begin the journey. I mean, that to me, that's the hardest part, and that's the most important part, is just man, just don't give up on the fact that God has created you to do something of significance. Nobody's an accident. We were all intentionally in the heart and mind of God, and that's easy to forget.
Yeah, that's beautiful, brother. And so definitely look that up, guys. Go to Amazon, go to Barnes and Noble. The book is called Potential by Troy Gramling. So look that up. I know it would be a blessing to you. I mean, we've obviously on a short podcast, we can only get into a little bit of what's actually included in that book. But I hope that just from this interview and from this conversation, you guys can see that the book would be incredibly inspiring. It would help you in tremendous ways as you begin this journey and help other people along on that journey. And it's time, guys, for us to really step into the full potential that God has for us. I feel like so often, I know this is in my own life, I waste so much time and I drag my feet and I doubt the decisions I'm making or whatever. And God is inviting us into an incredible journey where we can lay it all out on the table. We leave it all on the field. And at the end of my life, man, I had a preacher, I can't remember who it was, but many years ago preached a sermon. And he's like, guys, you got to die with your boots on, man. You got to give it all. You've got to leave it all on the field and give it all for the kingdom. And so, man, let's go into eternity to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Let's live into the full potential that God has for us, and let's become the men that God's called us to be. Amen. Troy, thank you so much for being on, brother. It was really an honor and a privilege to have you, and really looking forward to seeing what God continues to do through you and your ministry and through this book. But thank you for sharing your heart today, man, and thanks for just being on and sharing with our audience. It was really an honor.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and excited about all that God's going to do, and your winter time in Indianapolis.
Yeah, this will be our first winter in a long time. We've lived in India for 16 years, and our winters were very, very warm in India. So this will be the first time we're in the cold and the snow in Indianapolis. So, but I appreciate you, Troy. Looking forward to hanging out more, brother. And for those of you listening, listen, definitely check Troy out. Come over to our site as well at irondeep.com. We'd love to help serve you and your family as you really do your best to be the man that God's called you to be. Whether that's in business or in community, we're here, we've got your back, and we want to help you in any way we can. And so reach out to us, and we will see you guys next time. God bless you all.